Hey guys, this is Dr. G, and this is going to be the first lecture in this series on photosynthesis. So, if you look at this lecture online, this will address the process overview. So, in the actual PowerPoint that I put on Course Connect, what you'll see is that there's four key what you should be able to do points in that particular lecture. The first is write the general equations that represent the process of photosynthesis. The second is explain how photosynthesis powers the biosphere. The third is describe the general structure of chloroplast. And the fourth is compare and contrast the two phases of photosynthesis, the light reactions and carbon fixation. And this little chalk talk I'm going to do right now is really going to mimic what I do in class tomorrow. And it's going to be a complement to the actual PowerPoint slides. The subsequent lectures will all be on the PowerPoint. So I'll be curious how this particular format works for you. I look forward to hearing what you all say about that. And so the first thing we really want to talk about here is why should we even talk about photosynthesis? And you guys know the answer to this, right? So remember that plants are autotrophs. Autotrophs. So remember they're specifically photoautotrophs, which mean they make their own food. This means that they don't need other organisms in order to secure energy. So what that means is that they can then take that other organisms, like heterotrophs, okay, can eat those plants, obtaining that food and nutrients, which is full of energy, right, that came from the sun, okay, and then those heterotrophs can do work with it, right? Okay, so here, right, in the autotrophs, this came from photosynthesis. That energy comes from the sun, okay. Heterotrophs eat that, and they can do work by extracting energy from that food by doing cellular respiration. Cellular respiration, okay. So essentially photoautotrophs, or autotrophs in general, are powering all the organisms that need to eat something else, right? And so that's the reason we're focused on this. Okay? Alright, well, so how is this gonna work? Well, we know, okay, we've looked at this equation a bunch. We know that what the plant is essentially gonna do is gonna take some carbon dioxide, right? It's going to take some water and some sunlight. And then it's going to produce some glucose. I'm just going to write it a little lower because we're going to fill in some space. And some oxygen. So already we can see some of the benefits to having these plants. Not only do they provide the food to organisms that can't make their own food, but they provide oxygen that's necessary to oxidize that food. Okay? In addition to the food they're providing carbons that we can use for other stuff to build other things. Okay? So what's happening in the cellular respiration equation? Well, the first thing we should notice is that when we look at carbon dioxide and we look at glucose, we see that we're going from a disordered state to an ordered state. Well, that means that this reaction is normally endergonic. So how do you get an endergonic reaction to happen? You provide it with energy that's coming from the sun. Okay? So what's happening to the carbons in this particular reaction? Well, the carbons from carbon dioxide get reduced. How do you know they get reduced? Because we see that these carbons go from being bound to oxygens to being bound with hydrogens. Okay? So where are those hydrogens, where are those electrons coming from? They're coming from water. So water gets oxidized to oxygen. Okay? Alright? So that gets oxidized to oxygen. So what that means is that water donates all its electrons, well, a bunch of its electrons. Not donates. Well, those electrons get taken from water and get given to the carbons in carbon dioxide. And that's how those carbons in carbon dioxide become glucose molecules. So what do we mean become glucose molecules? Well, here's what you should think of. Those electrons from water are used to take these loose carbons in carbon dioxide that's flying all over the place and used as the glue to stick those carbons together. Now, one of the things you should realize here is that those electrons in water, right? If we recall, water looks like this. Those electrons in water are all next to the oxygen. So oxygen is holding on to those really tight. But what that means is that oxygen is not really trying to give up those electrons. So the other thing that sunlight is doing is providing the energy that the plant cell needs to oxidize water, or in other words, take those electrons from oxygen. Okay? Alright? So in this equation, carbon dioxide is reduced to glucose, right? It's reduced because those electrons are being extracted from water, and the energy you use to extract those electrons from water come from the sun. So in the process, you make glucose, or some carbohydrate, and oxygen. Okay? Okay, so where is this happening? Okay, this is happening in a leaf. This is going to be the most terrible. That's not that bad a leaf, right? There's a leaf. Okay, on the surface of the leaf there are little pores called stomata. And those stomata allow gas exchange. So CO2 can come in like that, right? And oxygen can actually leave the plant like that too, okay? And then underneath underneath the surface of the plant are these cells called mesophyll cells. Okay? So here you can imagine, here's a mesophyll cell. Okay, and inside that mesophyll cell is a compartment called the chloroplast. Okay, this is where photosynthesis is happening. So in the next slide, I'm just going to focus on the chloroplast. Okay. Okay, so now this is just the chloroplast. Okay, so here's the chloroplast. Okay. That chloroplast, just like the mitochondria, has two membranes. Okay, an outer chloroplast membrane and an inner chloroplast membrane. And inside that chloroplast is another compartment. That compartment is called the thylakoid. Thylakoid. Okay, it's in this little compartment that some of the photosynthetic reactions would happen, and in the other compartment is this sort of liquid space between the inner chloroplast membrane and the thylakoid membrane called the stroma. So again, that space between the inner chloroplast membrane and the thylakoid membrane is called the stroma. Excuse me. And inside the thylakoid membrane is called the lumen. Okay. All right. So this is the structure. Sorry for this pitiful picture, but this is the structure of the chloroplast, and the chloroplast is the photosynthetic organelle. So in the way that the mitochondria is the place where cellular respiration happens, in other words, citric acid cycle, pyruvate oxidation, oxidative phosphorylation, this is the organelle where all the photosynthetic reactions are going to happen. So it turns out, okay, that the reactions, that reaction that I showed you earlier, okay, the 6 carbon dioxide plus 6 water plus sunlight, giving you glucose plus 6 oxygen. That is the whole photosynthetic reaction. But just like cellular respiration happens in many little steps, photosynthesis happens in many little steps. And those little steps can be grouped into 2 broad reactions. In the first set of reactions, light is used to take those electrons from water and collect it in a molecule that's kind of like NAD, called NADP, to convert that to NADPH. Okay? The second thing that's happening here, okay, is that ATP is going to be produced. Now, the other thing I want to point out is if you're taking electrons from water, the result of that is oxygen. Okay? So, here's what happens, okay, in these light reactions, is you're producing 3 products. You're producing NADPH, so this thing like NAD, another electron carrier. So this is carrying electrons. You're producing energy in the form of ATP, and oxygen is basically a byproduct of this reaction. So those are the light reactions. Okay, so that means one half of the reactions you're collecting electrons and energy. Okay, so these are called the light reactions. And these reactions actually happen in the thylakoid. Okay, in the thylakoid membrane to be exact. Okay, all right. But our goal here is to make glucose, or make some kind of carbohydrate, okay? So then the next set of reactions is going to take advantage of the electrons and the energy, okay? So these next set of reactions take the okay, sorry about that. So to be exact, the NADPH from the light reactions, right, which remember has electrons, and remember those are going to come in the form of hydrogens, okay, and the ATP from the light reactions, so the energy, are going to be used to take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then fix it or put it in an organic molecule, which in this case will be ultimately glucose. So we can say that, but you'll see it's not really glucose when we do the process, okay? All right, so this is called, so we're going to use the electrons from NADPH to stick carbons together in glucose, and we're going to use ATP as the energy for this process. So this is called carbon fixation. Because you're taking loose carbon from the atmosphere and you're fixing it in an organic molecule. Or the Calvin cycle, okay, after the scientist that named after the scientist that discovered it. Or, and this is the name, these are the names we're going to use, the dark / light independent reactions. And the reason it's called light independent reactions is because these reactions don't actually use light directly. In other words, if you gave them the products of the light reactions, in other words, if you gave a plant NADPH and ATP, it would be able to fix carbon dioxide. So it doesn't need the light, but it needs the product from those reactions. So we call these the light independent reactions. Okay? So what we're going to do for the next lecture is we're going to talk about properties of light, and we're going to talk about how the light reactions actually work. Okay? So remember, go back to the take-home points at the very beginning of the PowerPoint online, and that's what this little whiteboard exercise, that's what you should be able to do at the end of this whiteboard exercise. Okay, take care.